And we're back. And I hope you've packed a lunch, because this is going to be a long one. If you're watching this on the can, don't forget to shake your legs so they don't fall asleep. This will be my last video for the year on Suspiria 2018, unless a bunch of new info is released, or if we get a sweet coffee table book or something. I do plan on doing a smaller and more self-contained review of the film and the original next year, but that would just be a surface level thing and not an analysis. Anyways, here's the sections that I'm going to be covering today. 1. Suspiria Part 1. 2. Feminist Art. 3. Dream Sequences. 4. Unseen Visions. 5. Madame Blanc's Perversions. And 6. Unused Elements. Let's kick this bad boy off with a quote found on the first page of the original draft from March 7th, 2016. A quote that perfectly sets the stage for the division between the witches and the world. Dance must be cheerful and show beautiful female bodies and have nothing to do with philosophy. This is a quote from Nazi politician and philologist, later turned Hitler acolyte Joseph Goebbels, who was clearly a super gross dude. Suspiria Part 1. The film was described as Part 1 in both the screenplay and on the slate while filming. It was part of a larger story, but designed to function on its own. Luca makes it clear in interviews that there will never be a follow-up, as the film was a box office disaster. Just over 8 million worldwide box office, with just under $1 million on home media, means a meager $9 million against a $20 million budget. He goes on to say, writer David Kajanik and I had really conceived it as the first half of a bigger story. I can tell you that in Part 2, the storyline was layered in 5 different time zones and spaces. One of these was Helena Markos being a charlatan woman in the year 1200 in Scotland and how she got the secret of her longevity. Suspiria Part 2 would dig into the origins of Madame Blanc and Helena Markos, both played by Tilda Swinton, and the future of Susie Banyan, Dakota Johnson. And in a later interview, I have this image in my mind of Helena Markos in solitude in the year 1212 in Scotland, or in Spain, wandering through a village and trying to find a way on how she can manipulate the women of the village. I have this image, I know she was there. I know it was 600 to 700 years before the actual storyline of this film. Now, I would love to endlessly speculate on what kind of shenanigans Mother Markos would get up to, and the kind of things Mother Suspiriorum would get to in the 80s and onward, but lack of details in this matter make it kind of pointless. Also, the more I think about how cool this would have been, the more I just want to curl up in a fetal position and cry. Feminist art informed the film, mostly in the horrific dream sequences and the final dance itself. Not all imagery has been cataloged, but here's what I've been able to find online so far. Untitled, from the Silueta series by Anna Mendieta from 1976. Also from the same artist, Rape Scene, 1973. Self-Portrait in Cupboard from Claude Cahun, 1932. Death Control, Gianna Payne, 1974. Then there are images of Pina Bausch, German modern dancer, choreographer, and ballet director. Blowbar of Pina Bausch, 1977. Untitled, Francesca Woodman, Providence, Rhode Island, 1976. Meet Joy, Carolee Schneemann, 1964. Les Médusées by Damien Jallet. Explosion Victim, August Sander, 1930. Paintings of Balthus. In Voluptas Mors, Philip Halsman with Salvador Dali, 1951. And Haxan, 1922, which was a fictionalized documentary showing the evolution of witchcraft. The dream sequences in the film are offered up as dreams forced onto Susie by the witches. They are to inform her of their world and prepare her for the work that is to be done. The dream sequences in the film are far more abstract than the ones found in the screenplay. Luca's visions ensure repeat viewings and heightened tension, whereas the screenplay offers up the information on a silver platter for the viewer. There are two main dream sequences in the film. The first I've called Carnal Murmurings, and the second one I've called Receiving the Blood. In the screenplay, there are four main dream sequences. I've called them Carnal Murmurings, The Bride, Receiving the Blood, and Death to Any Other Mother. I'm going to try and quickly go through some of the imagery and how I interpret them. The first sequence opens with the younger Marcos closing her hands, initiating a dream. We hear sounds of young Susie's carnal murmurings, a glowing font, either the spirit or understanding of Mother Suspiriorum, the beginning of a long hallway, of which we will see more of in later sequences. This hallway leads to her final form. A shattered mirror. Mirrors have multiple uses in magic, including divination and protection. A visual nod to self-portrait and cupboard. Young Susie is caught masturbating. A quick cut to horrific figures shrouded in sheets. I haven't found a reference for this yet. Susie's self-pleasure is interrupted when she's pulled out from the closet by her Mennonite mother. Cut to Madame Blanc on the floor, either mid-spell, or this is from a scene that was cut from later in the screenplay, a scene in which her and Susie share an intimate dance. Mrs. Banyan lifts an iron to young Susie. Cut to a poster of the Marcos Tons group. And notice there's a focus on hands, something we'll see more of later as well. A disheveled woman clutching pearls. Mrs. Banyan scolds young Susie by slamming a hot iron on her hand finally. A young person's hands hold hers. This could be a young Blanc, or just meant to be Susie. Quick cut of the matrons. The scarlet letter, likely Mrs. Banyan's sin. Someone caressing modern Marcos's hair. Madame Blanc placing hands on Susie's neck, likely imbuing her with power. Quick cut to Madame Blanc's solo performance, again likely from a cut sequence. Then we cut to a damaged body, likely Patricia or Olga. A premonition of death, to be summoned later. Madame Blanc's performance ends with either her stabbing, or this is merely a reference to masturbation or self-pleasure. In the next main sequence, it's Madame Blanc initiating the dream. It opens with Susie writhing in pleasure. We cut to red powder on the ground. We cut to a reference of Untitled by Francesca Woodman. Soiled underwear and a worm. This is a reference to Death Control. Cut to a reference of Untitled by Francesca Woodman again. We cut to an arm with obvious self-harm scars, likely the same body as the previous one. We cut to an image of the fiery font with a reference of Blobart. Quick cut to an organ, a piece of meat, possibly a lung, referencing either the original title sequence or organs used in witchcraft. We see a more grotesque scene of masturbation whereby the ceremonial hook is used. The hooks were used so as not to damage internal organs, much like when Olga is carried out after her destruction. This could also be the director just one-upping The Exorcist. Susie continues writhing while the font overtakes her. We cut to her farmhouse. Horses rushing signals something is wrong at home. Back to Blobart. Back to the farmhouse, a young face close up. Perhaps a healthy Mrs. Banyan or a younger Mrs. Banyan. Organs are smeared over a young woman. This is likely a reference to how organs are used in witchcraft and something that we're going to see more of in the final sequence. The font continues to overtake Susie. A quick scene of what appears to be a woman hanging upside down or bent over. Blood pours out the mouth. I believe this to be a scene of Susie receiving the blood as mentioned in the screenplay, and I'll get to more of that later. It could also be a reference to some feminist art that I have not been able to find an analog for. More images of masturbation or self-inflicted pain/pleasure by the sickle and the font continuing to overtake Susie, who appears curiously blindfolded. In the screenplay, the girls were blindfolded in order to prepare for ceremonies. This could be a reference to that. The bloodied face of a young Mrs. Banyan, or possibly Caroline? Cut to Madame Blanc. This is a scene from that cut dance sequence yet again. Susie writhing again. Her eyes are either bandaged, or there's a grotesque transformation happening. We see makeup and decaying teeth. Cut to the mirrored room as it's referred to in the screenplay, where we see Susie and Sara, likely suggesting that the witches are watching them. Then we see a reference to an art installation, Masked Woman, likely again from Death Control. We cut to a toilet with hair and urine. These are items used in witchcraft, used to control the girls. A scene of the policeman caught in a spider's web, a mouthful of hair so that they can't speak. This is what Susie sees in this particular scene, and I'll discuss that later. Madame Blanc and a sickle on Olga. 4 Mennonite jackets on a coat hanger back at Susie's home. The font continues to glow more intensely. It seems to cycle through colors from the original film. Quickly cut to an injured Sara, then back to Blanc. Close-up of a worm-covered mask once again over the font. Young Mrs. Banyan confronting young Susie. Madame Blanc violently swiping and dashing. A contorted body, possibly Susie? Blanc and Susie having an intimate dance, again from a deleted sequence. And then finally, Susie reveals that she knows who she is. And this is seen much earlier on in the original screenplay. Alright, now we're going to get into the dream sequences from the screenplay, and I'm going to read them to you so you don't have to read yourself. This first one I call Carnal Murmurings, and it appears on pages 32 to 33 of the screenplay. And just for reference, the screenplay is just over 100 pages, so not even a third into the film. Exterior, Ohio farmhouse. Day. Work is being done on the house. Shingles are hammered into place. A gaggle of Mennonite girls can be seen playing Crack the Whip outside, laughing in their pastel dresses. There are carnal murmurings coming from inside the house, out of one of the window screens. The girls hear it and come over to peer inside. Girls POV. Young Susie's feet are extending out of the closet. She's lying inside masturbating. One of the girls runs to fetch someone. In a moment, Susie's mother comes in and finds her. Susie's mother is younger here, healthy, not the ravaged woman from the opening credits. Susie, 13, is lying on her back with her Mennonite dress pulled up, bonnet off. Susie's mother reaches in and yanks Susie up by the hair. Susie steadies herself on the door jamb. Susie's sisters look on in horror from the window. Some of the men have come down off the roof as well to see what's going on. Susie, it's all in the rhythm, Mama. You draw it with your fingers. Susie's mother sees her fingers in the crack in the thin slatted closet door and pistons it shut. Susie pulls her hand free and holds it to her mouth, but even then her eyes smile into her mother's blast of shame. This next dream sequence from the screenplay comes not even 10 pages later, pages 40 to 41. And this is where things start to veer wildly from what ended up in the final product. I call this sequence The Bride. Susie walks through catacombs in her dream. A font of pure white flame lights up the bony corridors as she goes. Her feet are bare, bodies bent to every attitude, or collected and stored by part, line every inch of wall and ceiling, all leathery, all still. She goes from chamber to chamber. If something catches her eye, she approaches, no matter if it is low or as high up as it is. Physics don't matter here. She peers into the face of a dressed bride hung from the ceiling. She peers into the faces of a row of young boys seated on the floor along the wall, all dressed in woolen suits and caps. All the while, the font leads her to the sound of her own breathing. The only carryover into the film is the font and the hallway sequence, both found later in the film. The rest of the imagery is reduced to the weathery corpses we see stowed away in the annals of the building, like the body of Patricia, for example. The next sequence in the screenplay is again only a few pages away. I've called it Receiving the Blood. Interior, Mutterhaus, the Room of Holes. Night, dream sequence. Susie is naked, sitting on the floor, legs spread, knees up, chest to back, in a tight line with the other girls. She can't move her arms. She looks and sees the floor is full of smooth holes cut out of the wooden studio floor. Women are reaching up from below through the holes to hold the girls' wrists so they cannot get up. The room is enormous and dim, but Susie can see other matrons around them, staying a few steps back. The other girls are getting increasingly panicked. Some are crying, begging to be let free. A sound is in the room with them, a wet, diseased breathing. At the front of the line, a woman floats forward. She is 3 feet off the ground. She spreads her robes, and her heavy-set, aged torso can be vaguely seen in the dark. Something is dripping from between her legs. As she levitates over the first girl, robes sliding over the girl's shoulders, the girl turns her face away from the dripping coming from above. Repulsed and afraid, so does the next girl, and the next. The women on the periphery are chanting in the whisper. Mother is, mother is, mother is. Susie is trying to fight down her own panic. She's shaking. The mother approaches just overhead. Susie makes a decision. She throws back her head, opens her mouth, sticks out her tongue to receive the blood. Cut back to Susie's room, back at the Marcos company, at night. Susie shouts with urgency and defensiveness, "I know who I am! I know who I am!" Utterly horrifying, the only aspect of this sequence is Susie shouting that she knows who she is, which appears at the end of the film, but less than halfway through the screenplay. I'm fine with the majority of this not making it to the screen, as it's hideous, but I am intrigued by the nature of this ceremony. But again, super gross. Also, I prefer, as a viewer of the film, not knowing where Susie is at. Having it spelled out this early in the screenplay is less interesting, in my opinion. The next sequence I call Death to Any Other Mother. There are a few aspects of this that make it to the screen, but there are a few key details in the screenplay that I find interesting. Interior, Ohio farmhouse, adult's bedroom, day. Mrs. Banyan lies, dazed and pale, in her sickbed. Several neighbor women have collected there and are quietly singing a hymn. Mrs. Banyan fades in and out in a dream or a memory. A young Susie, 10, is in her homeschool class. She is meant to be memorizing a map of the United States, but keeps turning her workbook back to another page. The girl wants to look at the shapes of Europe instead. Mrs. Banyan, who's teaching her, snaps the page back, impatiently, as if for the 10th time. She hisses, "Susanna!" 10-year-old Susie looks up at her, unintimidated, even tolerant for now. But Mrs. Banyan is lifted from this memory as something enters the room with her. She has a fraction of a second to see the shadow's face before it overtakes her. Naomi, who has been sitting with the neighbor women, mending, looks up now into the dead face of her mother. There's a bunch of details in those 2 pages that obviously didn't make it into the final film, and I'm going to get to that later. Much later. I'm going to do a huge info dump and read a whole bunch of pages because, oh boy, the ceremony is a little bit different. Let's move on to Madame Blanc's perversions. Madame Blanc has some kinks, and in a vulgar display of power, she changes the eye colors of her preferred girls during the performance of Volk. I've already covered this briefly in my video entitled The Hidden Secrets of Witchcraft in Suspiria. Bonus, during the performance of Volk, we see Madame Blanc experience an orgasm. I thought this was merely a mention in the screenplay and something they wouldn't bother putting on film, but of course they did. Can't believe I missed this one too. Unseen visions. Susie's perception is altered from the beginning in the screenplay. None of this is really evident in the final film. I understand why it was done, because in the film we're supposed to wonder who she is and whether or not she knows of her identity. It would have been readily apparent if everything had gone exactly as planned in the screenplay. In the screenplay, we are privy to what is going on in her head, whereas the film leaves us guessing. It's clear that in the screenplay that Susie is not quite as innocent as the film would have our protagonist be. By the end of the screenplay, we bear witness to possibly the most interesting view of her power, and a scene that I really had wished made it into the final film. Before I get to that sequence, there's 2 other pretty interesting ones as well. The first one I call Detectives Teased, on page 43. As the detectives are teased, we see a wide-eyed Susie chuckle at the strange goings-on of the witches as they hold the detectives in a trance and mock them. The screenplay makes it clear that she was peering into their world. I cover the scene briefly in my other Suspiria video, but here is the reference in the screenplay. Susie's POV. Detective Hall and Mosier stand expressionless and naked before Miss Tanner, Miss Huler, and Miss Vendegast, their genitals hanging out. Moser's body is paunchy, with a scar from a bullet wound on his side. Hal has tattoos like a longshoreman and traces of an athletic past lost to beer and schnitzel. Miss Huler steps into view behind Vendegast and Tanner. The women recline in their chairs, chatting over what they like. An image flashes in Susie's head. Detective Hall raised up in some kind of web. His mouth is covered with it, so he is silent. He hangs in a restless void, in some kind of sustained animal release. Susie steps back out of view, jolted by these images. Sara hasn't seen what she's seen, so Susie steers her back toward the staircase to the first floor. Susie looks back once, but says nothing. The next scene I simply call Leaping and appears on page 58 in the screenplay. Susie receives a taste of incoming power as she sees floor tiles laid out, rot over time, and return to their original state. Susie is also aware of her newfound ability and is dismissive with regards to its origin. Blanc continued, "If you're going to dance, you must learn one of the languages of dance. It should be French. You'll never learn Russian if you're only starting now. You'd go insane. Are you warm enough here?" Susie, "Yes, thank you." Blanc, "Stretch if you need to. Otherwise, let's watch you jump here, where you can see every angle." Susie readies herself and tries a jump. It is inches higher now. Blanc watches her closely to see if she understands what has happened. Susie tries again and can feel the difference. Susie is clearly understanding something. Something momentous has happened. Her jumps look exactly like Caroline's in their form. They may, in fact, somehow be Caroline's. This is a crucial moment and Blanc knows it. If Susie backs away from what's happening, all is lost. But Susie looks her in the eye and tells her, "You see, sometimes I only need to be told twice." The next sequence I call In and Out of Time, and it appears on pages 86 to 87 in the screenplay, so fairly close to the end. There are a few elements of this sequence that make it to the final film, but nothing as shocking as this. Exterior, the streets of Berlin, night. Susie begins to walk, taking in the early stirring of Berlin nightlife. As she walks, the breathing is with her, but something odd begins happening as well. Her awareness begins to focus on little moments of sadness or aggression. She can hear a couple arguing quietly a block away. In a passing car, a child spills a soda on the leather seat. Then she sees the boy's father angrily shove the can into his son's face when he discovers it 20 minutes from now. She sees a man photographing damage done to a suit shop with a brownie camera. Then the stormtroopers kicking the window in. She's going forward and backward in time and tasting all the flavors of this continuing patriarchy. She sees the Berlin Wall being put up, being torn down. She can see a skinhead almost tenderly polishing his 10-hole boots when later wiping blood off them. Groups of Muslim men and keffiyehs take flags of Jordan out of their plastic sleeves, the price tag still on them, even as someone burns them. She observes a lit window in which a young woman is arrested by SS. Then, the same woman, elderly now, calls in a prescription refill, introducing herself as a patient number. Susie is not afraid of what she's seeing, or of where it belongs in history. Once she adjusts to it, she walks flushed and amazed through these mirages, as if through a great museum, humbled by her proximity to things that so delight her. The sighing in her head plays as its accompaniment. For me, this is the most interesting sequence or idea not found in the film, as it explores a fraction of the abilities granted by a timeless goddess and the kind of power that was wooing and calling to her the entire film. Susie weaves in and out of time, soaking in the emotions felt at each event. The film didn't have a massive budget, so I understand why a sequence like this wouldn't have been filmed, but it still would have been pretty darn awesome. I do prefer when films leave something to the imagination, and this definitely doesn't. I still kind of love the idea. Alright, now we're going to get on to Unused Elements. Counting the steps. Sara once again counts the number of steps it takes to find the witch's hideout in the building. The answer in the screenplay is 42, which is obviously a reference to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. Is this significant in any way? No, but it's just kind of cool. For nerds. Objects. In the screenplay, what she finds are dozens of objects made of silver or porcelain. Some are figurative, a trio of women. Some are mythical beasts, such as a black dog. Some vaguely echo body parts and genitals, and some look to be tools for some sort of arcane function or another. I did already mention this in my previous Suspiria video, and I can understand why some of these things weren't put on display. I, for one, don't need to see a display case full of genitals, but yeah, maybe that's just me. Alright, moving on. The ceremony. There's going to be a lot of sections here, so buckle up. If you haven't finished your lunch, now's the time to grab that sandwich. Maybe stretch your legs, grab some water, I don't know, let the dog out, whatever. Let's go. The feast. The witches are far more cruel in this ceremony, as displayed by their actions towards Lutz and their indignation of the dead girls. From here, there is a view of all below. Susie sees a great room in which a hideous, raucous tableau is taking place. All the matrons are seated around the huge triangular table. The table is now set with all nature of arcane dishes and crockery. They are feasting. The feasting room has 3 high stone arches leading to a vast and separate darkness in each direction. Susie notices Klemperer, stripped naked now, has been put in the center space inside the triangle and table forms. The matrons taunt him, summoning him from one to the next, where he is made to eat victuals off their plates, some of which look like stool, some like organs, perhaps from animals, perhaps not. He is muttering, "I am not guilty, I remember, I am innocent." His jowls are stained. He is forced to take wine from the matron's own laughing mouths. The girls. The sacrificial girls dispatched earlier are reanimated and used to serve. Not worried about heresy, they dress them as a parody of the 3 mothers. Susie next notices 3 girls are serving the matrons. All have masks depicting the faces of the 3 mothers. The mother of tears, the mother of shadows, the mother of sighs. Susie can see from the tone of their flesh they are dead. One of the girls, the one masked as Mother Suspiriorum, has noticed her also. She stands looking up at Susie until she is called back into service. The dead girls serve the matrons who, in turn, needle into the girls' open palms with special tines so the girls' dead blood sauces their plates. Some of the matrons have noticed Susie at the top of the stairs as well. They raise their cups in her direction, with toasts and great heaving smiles. We expect that the godlike witch, hidden in the shadows this entire time, would be a force to be reckoned with. Instead, we see a disgraceful figure. Susie is not impressed. Also, Marcos is generally uncaring and self-centered, not maternal at all. The repeated theme of heavy breathing and sighs is not resolved when Susie hears Marcos's breathing. It is sickly, much like her own mother's breath, and not the sound that's driven her throughout the entire screenplay or film. Blanc, off screen. Susie, don't you know who this is? Susie looks. The bent old woman beside Blanc is looking at her, studying her. This is Helena Marcos? She is hard to look at. So weighed down and disfigured by tumors is she. Some lay flat, others are raised up on stalks like warts. She is covered by them, made pregnant by them. She is a horrific vision of age in a human form. Not the normal way age treats the body, but the product of time being turned back and again and again and again until the skin and tissue cannot hold so many contradictions. She looks angry to be so tired. Susie nods. She performs the slightest bow. Susie, I'm ready, madame. Blanc nods but doesn't respond. Susie says to her directly, You look afraid. Marcos laughs. It is the sound of amused air climbing past whatever tumors lies within. Marcos, she is afraid for you, dear. You know what we have planned for you? There'll be nothing of you left inside, only space for me. Susie, I came here for this. I know that now. Susie holds out her hand. Blanc takes it. The sighs. The sighs, which are attributed to the mother of sighs, do not belong to this dying matron, causing the audience confusion, or it would have, had this been more clear in the film. Susie, I want what's coming. You've all waited long enough. Marcos gives her an almost lascivious look. Susie listens to Marcos's labored breathing. This is not the breathing she's had in her head all this time. This speaks of only illness, not the entire language Susie has been hearing within the sighs. Then Marcos slowly raises a hand. Within seconds, the woman below all see the gesture and quiet. Let it begin. The ceremony plays out differently. The feast tables are removed. The avatars for the three mothers hold lutes in place with gold chains. Susie watches as the plates are removed with ritualistic precision. The tables are dismantled and taken to the sides, leaving an empty space in the center of the room. A great music begins. Klemperer is taken to the base of the staircase to witness what is about to happen. The three dead girls hold 3 golden leashes fixed around his neck. Open again. The dancers are brought in blindfolded. If they could see, they'd surely be driven mad. The language of the dance of Open Again begins to summon a transformative force. Susie sees the rest of the girls from the company step into the space, entranced somehow and blindfolded. They begin the choreography of Open Again. They don't seem to know where they are, they just dance. The matrons down on the floor dance among them. All the women are nude. Every shape and state of the female body is on display. A low drone begins out of the air, taking its vibrations from the spell of the dance. The girls begin dancing backward now, like a tide going out, then forward again, coaxing something to come forward from the infinite spaces beyond the room. Confusion. Marcos calls out that the spell is working, however, Susie has a different notion. They are summoning what we need. Susie. Death. Helena Marcos. What do you think is happening, girl? Susie. A ritual to renew you. Helena Marcos. Renew is a beautiful word. Do you come to this willingly? I do. You must have no doubts, Susie. If you do, I will take you back. Take all of this out of your head. You can forget everything. Marcos laughs smugly. Except your jumps and your kicks and leaps and rolls. Blanc. I would like this to be pure. Marcos. We know what you would like. This is not vanity. Who knows how much longer we must march forward? Susie. I can be both. Blanc looks at Susie, then at Marcos. You see, she doesn't understand. Blanc steps forward, but Marcos holds her with a look. Susie. I do. Helena Marcos. She understands enough. On the floor, girl. The summons. Although similar to the final product, this imagery is far more supernatural and less concrete. In the vastness beyond the arch, opposite the stairs, where light and darkness meet, something is assembling itself. It can be felt before it can be seen. Some of the matrons are sensing it. Blanc is sensing it. Something's wrong. You don't feel it? Under the arch, a wet blackness is assembling into being. Schism. The schism between Marcos and Blanc is ended, and more clarity is given in the script as to the nature of the damage done. But with a gesture, Marcos makes a dash with her hand out at Blanc, and Blanc's neck is chopped from behind. Blanc crumples to her knees and slumps back against the wall. The chop has severed her spine, but not her trachea. Her head slides forward until it is stopped by her chest. Then it sits there, face cast downward. Susie hears this take place, but does not dare look. Marcos turns her attention back to Susie. I am wondering if, with her trachea intact, she's either still able to utter spells, if this coven does so at all, or if there was any protection in place for such an attack. False mothers. In the worst case of careful for what you wish for, Susie is asked to put down any false mothers. Helena Marcos. We have been on two sides of this for too long. You want this girl? Yes. If you accept me and accept what we seek, you must put down the woman who bore you to this world. Susie closes her eyes. She concentrates on the breathing, the sighs in her head, pulling into her own rhythm. Think of that false mother now, lying in her reek of pain. Release her from you. You have the mothers you need now. Death to any other mother. Susie. I am the mother. Marcos looks down at her, not sure she's heard correctly. I am she. Susie's transformation or baptism is complete. The dancing and singing is frantic, but the witches are not prepared for what happens next. Something black and dripping with the energy of its passage into the world rides out of the space beneath the arch and is suddenly in the same room with them. Some of the matrons scream and move back from it. It's clear nothing like this has ever been seen before in these rooms. Others are steadfast and continue dancing, terrified, some within feet of it. The mesmerized, blindfolded girls remain the same in the dance, unaware. Marcos herself is looking at the black thing in confused awe. She glances over at Blanc, concerned now that Blanc is behind this or understands it. But it is Susie who looks up at Marcos. You've played at this long enough. Marcos opens her mouth in shock. She hisses. Who are you? Whom were you anointed for? Which of the three? Mother Suspiriorum, girl. Susie says simply, finally, coming into her full identity. I am she. At the bottom of the stairs, the girl dressed as Mother Suspiriorum hears this and takes off her mask. It is Sara. She looks up at Susie and holds out the mask reverently. The mother, the mother! Others who have supported Marcos from the start begin to cry or wail out. What is happening is akin to Jesus Christ himself walking into a modern Easter service. No one is prepared for one of the three mothers being among them. Marcos looks down at Susie, the first twitch of astonishment entering her withered face. Death to any other mother. The summoned creature makes short work of the false prophet and its disciples, while simultaneously snuffing out Mrs. Banyan, as seen in dream sequence number 4. The method of execution is different from the final film, less explosive. Night. Death reaches Marcos, rears up and tears through the woman's meager magical defenses, then through her flesh. Susie gets slowly to her feet to watch. When it is finished, it goes lopping back down the stairs to every Marcos sight in the room. They see it coming and scream. Miss Mandel, Milius, Balfour, Huller, Marx, Pavla, Verdigast, and Alberta. The black thing cuts them down in its killing ebb, leaving the Blancites untouched. Then it uncoils into the void beyond. Tanner is spared. She's weeping. The remaining witches find their voices and begin to scream praises. They thought they were about to witness the rebirth of their leader, Helena Marcos, and instead they have seen the arrival of one of the very mothers they have only read about for centuries. Matrons in the room, mutter, Mother Suspiriorum. The Sacred Heart. The imagery in the film is fashioned after the Sacred Heart painting of Mary, Mother of God. However, in the screenplay, it's somehow even more grotesque. As Susie walks down the stairs, the font of light burns over her head, scattering all shadow, all ambiguity. Up close to it, as Susie is, one can hear the sound of 10,000 forests burning in it. She reaches up and pulls her throat open along a vertical to form a new mouth to speak out of. The imagery in the final film is much closer to the Sacred Heart painting, but this is also pretty impressive and horrific. Yeah, I'm fine with the decision they made. The coven, now purged of apostasy and with their true faith restored, rejoices. Mother Suspiriorum wants to celebrate and enjoy this time with her friends. Instead, she sees their suffering and grants them reprieve. When she reaches the bottom where Sara stands, she takes the mask from her and puts it aside. Then she takes off Olga's and then Patricia's, who have come forward, and sets them aside. She leads them into a dance, telling them as they go, I am here now, I'm with you. Their eyes are rimmed with white. They dance for a time until Susie recognizes they are sad in their state. Mother, we are so tired. What do you ask? To die. She places a hand briefly on Olga's ruined face, then Patricia's, and lets them die mortal deaths. She and Sara dance for a time until Sara says to her, Mother, please, what do you ask? To die. And Susie puts her hand briefly on Sara's face like a lover would, and then over it until she falls away, as if from a great height, from the mortal world into death. Susie dances in solo then, charging the air, the room, the coven with her power. Finally, she calls out to the other witches. "It is beautiful, beautiful. Continue the dance. Continue the dance." The dancers wind back up again, but with a force that gives the impression Susie is now controlling them. She enters the dance, leads it into the air, with no underfoot or overhead, just circles and circles of power. Klemperer is watching all of this unfold, his mind at the edge of ruin. Klemperer's gift. This scene plays out similarly, but without the visual representation of her power. Also, Klemperer eyes the knife from his dish and contemplates violence at the hearing of Anka's fate. Unlike the film, the screenplay ends on a more somber note. Suspiriorum feasts on the pain of realization, but removes the guilt from the man's mind. Her monologue from the film is not present. While he no longer has the pain of realization, there is the notion that love is worth the pain it can cause. The love he had for his wife sustained him and informed his day-to-day. But Susie closes her eyes, summoning a path through history to his wife. Her silhouette begins to change as she exerts herself. He can see the outline of Mother Suspiriorum, the halo of darkness. Klemperer's eyes are already tearing up with this confirmation of his worst nightmare. He clamps them shut. When he opens them, he is looking at the bedside table beside him, where the cut-up pear sits in a dish with the knife. It is not a big knife, but it is sharp, and it's within reach. When Susie recounts what happened to Ankh in the film, she's merely doing an oral retelling, but in the screenplay, it's clear that she's diving back into history to see what happened. Close on, under the lids, Susie's eyes move here and there as if she is seeing what she's describing. Susie reaches the end and opens her eyes back in her mortal form. She sees Klemperers crying through all of this, rocking with silent, hopeless sobs. Hope, even hope scraped thin, was preferable to him than this. She savors his pain. "Be calm, doctor, that's not the gift." Susie leans in and takes his hand. Suspiriorum removes the memory of all the witches and the women that have touched him, and he removes his pain as well. She does so without prompting. This leaves him to seize. The screenplay ends on a less hopeful note. We end on the image of the ruined fountain where Klemperer used to stop and linger with his wife's memory. It is empty now and will be from now on. A wife, a life, an entire war have been forgotten. Oh, and as a bonus, we get confirmation that Blanc is definitely still alive. I mean, we see it in the film, but it's a little bit more clear here. Blanc is still alive. Her eyes look up from her half-severed head. She tries to speak. She blinks at the gathering women. Magic will fix that up, right? Right? Just maybe some Neosporin and a Band-Aid? Yeah, she'll be fine. It's all good. Phew, okay. There's some of my favorite stuff from the screenplay. I probably could have read the entire thing, but that would have been even more boring than this video already is. I strongly recommend hunting it down. It's on the internet, there's plenty of places. Maybe I'll put a link in somewhere. I don't know. We'll find out. Anyways, read the thing. It's a treasure trove of information if you love this film. That's probably going to do it for now, because like I said earlier, I don't suspect they're going to release any more information on the planned sequels or art books or anything of that matter. I've only been able to track down one piece of storyboard art and nothing as far as concept art. There's some cool stuff on ArtStation about the renderings used to create death. I'll put a link of that here. If anyone made it to the end, and I wouldn't be surprised if I'm the only one that has, thanks very much. Leave a comment if you liked it, didn't, if I missed anything, if there's anything you're aware of that I'm not, please let me know. The obsession never ends. Thanks for taking this journey with me. I really appreciate it. I'll see you next time.